This episode of Selling Together is brought to you by our sponsors, RevGenius. RevGenius is a community of over 35,000 SaaS revenue professionals that come together to learn, share, and grow. Find out more at revgenius.com. That's revgenius.com. Hello and welcome to this episode of Selling Together, a Partner Hacker podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Shipman. Last week marked what I believe is the first big partnering conference in conference season, Shop Talk. So many incredible folks from e-commerce headed to Las Vegas to meet and network and build relationship momentum that fuels new and existing partnerships for the rest of the year. All of the top retailers and service providers came together to figure out how to work together to provide their customers with innovative solutions and experiences. LinkedIn was on fire with all of the connections being made and the fun being had. I personally am headed to SaaS Connect in April to meet with members of the Cloud Software Association. I went last year as my first ever partnerships conference, and it was electric. I can't wait to get back and hear from all of the top partner folks about how they're making strides in their industries. Then in June, I'm headed to Crossbeam's Supernode Conference in San Diego. Last year was their inaugural conference, and it was one of the best conferences that I've ever been to across industry and career. It was incredibly well curated, focused, meaningful, and it left so much space to network without missing out on meaningful content. Finally, I'm signed up to go to Catalyst by Partnership Leaders. It's in August here in my hometown of Denver. I am so stoked to welcome all of my partnership colleagues and friends from around the globe to my city and discuss all the things in partnerships that's working, all the things that are not, and how we move forward as practitioners. Partner-led Everything by Partner Hackers also going on later in the year in November as a remote event that I'm super excited about and was so impactful last year. And I also heard a little hubbub on the Partner Hacker and Reveal merge announcement that there may be a live event by Partner Hacker called Nearbound that may or may not take place around the time of HubSpot's Inbound. These rumors are absolutely unconfirmed, but if it does happen, you know I'll be there. All of these conferences are great places to build your partner pipeline. They aren't just for partner professionals, and we'd love to see more sellers, more marketers, more product people, more success professionals. We would love to be able to share our practice with you and help you to grow your partner practice. All right, let's get to today's show with guest John Jankowski. I'm stoked today to introduce my guest, John Jankowski. Hey, John.
Hey, Jesse, how you doing?
I want everybody in our community to kind of know who you are and know what you're up to. So could you just give us a quick rundown on who is John Jankowski?
Yeah, sure. It'd be my pleasure. And again, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this today. So again, John Jankowski, Ready to Rev, Sales Solutions is my practice. And I act as an outsourced VP of sales for my clients. I've recently started my practice about, give or take, 6 months ago, after spending almost 30 years in sales leadership roles, executive leadership roles in the corporate world, working for large publicly traded companies, selling software, security software, and technology. My last role was North America VP of Sales and loved every bit of it. But it was time to get a little bit better balance in my life, so I started my own practice.
One of the things that Partner Hacker loves to do, for anybody who's been following Partner Hacker for a little while, who's the media company that Selling Together is distributed under, is to talk about partnerships in business in the context of analogies. There's all kinds of analogies that they love to make, and I love them too. And one of the ones that I think that we're going to have a fun time with today is the analogy between partnerships, business partnerships, and how closely they relate to our like personal partnerships. So like, I think I was telling you earlier, and anybody who's kind of heard my story before knows that when I started in partnerships, I had no context. They were like, you're going to build enablement for strategic partnerships. And I was like, awesome. what is a
What's
business
that?
partnership? What does it do? And so the only context that I really had was like my marriage. That was the partnership that I understood more intimately than any other partnership. And I think that there is for anybody who's never engaged in partnerships before, I think it's okay to like look at those close relationships that you've built in your personal life and like take what works and apply it to your business partnerships and like see how that works. And I know that you probably have a similar feeling about like what are the foundations or building blocks that you found in your personal relationships that you applied to your partner, your business partnerships.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, it's this subject on partnerships and many other things in our business lives always seems to come up, and it's like, well, is this in your personal life or is it your business life? And for me, it's a really difficult separation because I am who I am, and hopefully I'm representing my business life in the most professional manner, ethical, honest way that I can, which is no different than in my personal life. Do I share things in my business setting that I, might not, that are, more personal to me? Sure. And vice versa. My wife is really not interested in, all of the deep details of the day-to-day business happenings of Ready to Rev Sales Solutions, right? She may ask, but then when I tell her, she's like, okay, I don't really care. Right? It's too much. It's too much detail, right? So, but other than that, the foundational concepts of a partnership, I think, are very applicable in both worlds. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, all that starts with trust. If you don't have trust in your partnership, then you're going to question everything, and you're going to question methods. You're going to question, do you believe? And if you're questioning, then you're never going to reach the level of integration in that partnership, which means, integration. When I use that term, I mean the mutual value that you can derive out of that partnership. So I don't know if that resonates or what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm thinking about like if I go back to 2005. uh so I've been married for 17 years now. If I go back to 2005, like when I first met my husband, um and it wasn't some people definitely the phenomenon exists of love at first sight. That was not me. It wasn't super slow moving, but I certainly wasn't like, oh yeah, there's like a potential there, but he did. There was a there was definitely a reciprocal, like on the other side of it, he was like, oh, there's some value there, right? But my initial reaction to him was sort of like, oh, this is a cool guy, and I like hanging out, and like we're friends. Um, and that was perfectly fine with me, right? I didn't necessarily want any more. And so I'm curious if like you see those sort of initial, when you're thinking about creating new partnerships, or like who you're going to partner with, or like what you're looking for in that mutual value that you feel like could be a long-term commitment to one another from like a business perspective. Like, what are the things that you're initially looking for in a partnership, in a business partnership, that you're like, there's potential there?
Yeah, sure. I think that, and maybe it's different for some of us, but in terms of that initial partnership, and when we talk about mutual value, it's certainly all about, can we derive something from each other that makes us both better together? And when you see that happen, or when you see the opportunity for that to exist, it becomes interesting. And I have, rarely in my career do I have bad meetings, initial meetings, even ongoing meetings. What may not be as, productive, or could be classified as bad, is some of the follow-ups to that. It's like we get in, we have a discussion, everything sounds good, we make commitments, and then of course it's the follow through, or in the case of some bad partnerships, the lack of follow through. And so I think that's where it all starts. And a great mentor of mine years ago, shared the term trust but verify. So I'm an optimistic person. Hopefully, most great salespeople and sales leaders are. But I always follow that trust but verify. And so, in a new partnership that sounds exciting, has the potential to be very meaningful for both parties, whether it's personal or business oriented, it's like, okay, I want to trust that this can work, but I also want to verify. And the verification comes from actions and commitments to those actions. You do what you say you're going to do. And I think when you come across that kind of partnership, one, it doesn't always happen. So when you see it, you're like, okay, that's different. Somebody's actually excited, competent, and they're following up. When you come across those types of partners, you tend to, your ears perk up, your senses perk up, and you say, okay, I want to invest in this more, and then keep that trust building and then verifying each step of the way.
Yeah, and it's also like so interesting of like partnerships from a business perspective, or like, the contract that's created between two entities is built on this concept of like better together, mutual value. You have something, I have something, we put it together, it solves a customer problem, and there's this like overarching like, yeah, there's something here. But the reality is like on the ground in a sales organization, it's still individual relationships that have to be built and trusted in order for the flywheel to actually spin and for the value of those two organizations together to be realized. So I always kind of like in my mind the analogy was like, well, two companies, like two organizations, they find bliss and they create a relationship, but in reality we're still very much still talking about a person to person relationship. And so like what has been your experience as a VP of sales for 30 years across the tech industry with creating relationships with other sales leaders at other companies, and what has worked and what hasn't?
Whew. Yeah, so that's a great question, and those relationships and partnerships, in many cases can and are very fruitful. I have the opportunity to be very fruitful for both organizations, and many times executives will get together and think about that partnership and how our solution can fit as part of another solution with another partner, or our solution can fit in terms of a service, and this partnership makes a lot of sense. And then they start to build out the foundation of what that looks like for both organizations. And but just because you publish it and just because it may make sense and it may bring customers additional value doesn't mean it's going to happen, because as you point out, everything that happens in that partnership is person to person. And what may be wildly successful on the West Coast or in your town may not be wildly successful for me in my town. Now it should be, if we have two companies that have mutual value in terms of their represented or combined solutions to serve a greater purpose for a client. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to people working with people and personalities. And sometimes if that trust isn't there, or worse, these partnerships in some cases they tend to be formalized maybe more recently, but there's relationships and activity that have taken place long before the ink hits the proverbial contract. And in some of those cases where trust has been not established or broken, people have really long memories and don't want to let go of those things, and understandably so. If I refer you into one of my clients and you don't execute accordingly, it's going to be tough to overcome that, because my personal credibility based on that introduction takes place, and if you don't execute to beyond the customer's expectations and your subject matter expertise, that's extremely disappointing, and it's hard to get over that. So when those things happen, that's where in some cases, individualized cases, that partnership may never get off the ground. But again, when you look at the collective relationship and the bigger picture of those two organizations serving their clients, hopefully that's where that partnership can be really successful.
So do you maybe have an example of a time when you actually did like sit down with like a leader at another company and sort of try to build trust through process? Was it actually like through process, or was it just through like philosophy? Were there incentives? Like what was the actual actions that you were taking in order to actually like build and maintain that trust with a sales leader at another partner company?
Yeah, when you're working with two organizations that ultimately again want to combine products or services to serve that client, it's all the above, which tends to work best, right? That not only is there an education and a reason that needs to take place for why these two companies are working together, but there also has to be that mutual trust and strong level of communications between those organizations, and there's got to be that vision alignment with regard to how you serve your clients, with regard to that partnership. And you shouldn't be over reaching in terms of what those things are, or perhaps the duration of how long that partnership lasts. I've had partnerships that have been created where they work really well for a number of years. And then another organization acquired a piece of technology that was competitive to the technology that we had in our portfolio. And it didn't mean that the entire relationship deteriorated, but it did mean that the partnership was now limited. And I think the just like in our personal relationships, you've got to be big minded in terms of why you're partnering, and when something changes, why it may not make sense to continue to partner or to partner now on a limited basis. You know, we always feel when a partnership starts to go in the wrong direction that it's the other person. When in reality, it's a shared experience, right? It's like, well, we probably done something here, or our expectations are unreasonable. In the case of that acquisition of another technology, we still can partner in some of the technology areas, just not in the competitive technology areas. But over time, that can be difficult because, of course, the expectations we have as in leadership roles is you want to sell the entire portfolio that you have available to your clients. So now, if your partner doesn't want to sell that part of the portfolio, that's the first crack in the foundation of that great partnership. Does it mean it caves in on itself? Not necessarily, but it does mean there's the first friction point. And if enough of those friction points develop, then likely that partnership is going to not produce the kind of fruit that it was when things were not as competitive. I think differently to a marriage, that is the ultimate partnership, and you're going to, especially when you involve children in that marriage, you're going to involve you're going to do whatever it takes ethically to make sure that that marriage is stable and is successful and that everybody is happy, right? In business it should be that way too, but I think the difference in the business world is the external factors that could come into that relationship may be on your control. I'll give you one quick case in point analogy. I was working for a networking company, and we had a very, very large computer company that was actually OEMing part of our portfolio, not the whole portfolio, but part of our portfolio. And they were a big partner, doing tens of millions of dollars with us. And then the company that we were working for, or that I was working for at the time, was acquired by a bigger company who also happened to produce computers and servers. And it immediately put that relationship in jeopardy for obvious reasons and understandable reasons. So the lifespan of that partnership had to naturally sunset for that reason. And it wasn't through anybody's well, I guess we were acquired, so we had to agree to be acquired. So there was some intention there, but the partnership in that capacity, like I said, came to a natural conclusion. You don't expect that to ever happen in a personal relationship, right?
It's obvious to me, like as a sales leader for a long time in tech, that partnerships were a part of your business, part of your portfolio. Clearly, like OEM was a thing. And so how did you go about leading your sales teams into working with partners, and what were some of the expectations that you had for them? What were some of the incentives that you created around like including partners in deals?
Yeah, sure. So, it's interesting. If you're going to work with, I have been very, very committed and clear. If we're an organization that is selling through partners, then we're an organization that's selling through partners. It is unfair, and well, I'll just leave it at unfair. If we're going to do direct business, but we're relying on our partners to help us represent our products and our solutions to our clients, because your partners have seen that before, right? Every partner can recant the story how they were working with the original manufacturer, whether it was software or hardware, and they were partnered together. And then suddenly the customer, the client, right, is usually how this is masked. The client says, "Oh, no, I insist on a direct relationship." And that's rarely, if ever, I don't think I've ever seen an example where that is the reality. The reality is the customer or the client wants the best price. And they make an assumption that because the partner is making margin, they're not going to get the best price from the partner, they'll get it from the manufacturer. And so the reality of that is just simply not true, right? If you've got, especially if you're working with very big partners who are certified on your solutions, they can actually offer better pricing than you as the manufacturer if you've set your pricing strategy through your partners correctly, because a small customer is not going to be doing, most likely, tens of millions of dollars like your partners are. So based on that, they should, and their investment in getting certified on your solutions, they should actually be able to provide that client better pricing than you yourself as a manufacturer. So, the point there is either you're selling through partners or you're not. And if you're not, then you have direct relationships with your clients, and that's great. If you are, then you set up all the requisite incentives for your sales team to work with those partners to make sure that trust is there, communication is there, the incentives are there. And then, invariably you see incredibly great things happen in exponential growth. And every, and rarely do I use all or every or never, but every organization that's selling through partners is doing so because they could never get that kind of scale by building out a direct touch sales force. You can't scale the largest companies in the world. You can't cease to scale like that without your partners. So if you do have a growth strategy and you ultimately want to continue to grow or IPO or whatever the goals of the organization are, you really need to involve partners. And so you want to start that journey early. You want to set those expectations. There is no direct sales, right? We're doing direct touch with our partners, and we're going to be there together, and we're going to communicate and do all the good things that you do in a partnership.
So now that you've sort of moved out of the corporate world, congratulations, by the way. Now that you moved out of the corporate world and you are essentially, the revenue department fractionally for a lot of these small companies, like what are you telling them in terms of growth and scale through partnerships? Are you having them wait? Is it something that you go in with as a strategy to begin with, or how are you thinking about that, knowing that you've had success, selling with and through partners your whole career?
Yeah, sure. I think the advice that I'm always leading with is to try to get leverage from those partnerships. And again, you have to be cognizant of what it is that you're representing in terms of the solutions. if you've got really complex systems, services, or products, enabling and educating your partners in the early stage, you may spend more time doing that than you have time available relative to your revenue expectations. So, in the earliest of stages, you may be better served initially without investing in those partnerships. But when I say early stages, I'm talking 0 to, a couple $1,000,000, and more specific to the software and technology space. But aside from that, I'm always seeking for partnerships for my clients to help them scale their business, because you can do that at a lower cost to your own operations, and you can build out your revenue streams profitably and even more quickly than hiring sales teams, training sales teams, and doing that. So it's very dependent on the organization and the products and services that they're selling, but first and foremost, always seeking what those partnership opportunities are to help scale revenue. And I'll share one last quick thing there. When organizations, especially smaller organizations, when they look at their quality of earnings, there's an associated quality of sales that they should also be looking at. And that quality of sales is what does that sales infrastructure look like, and how predictable are those future results that can take place, next month, next quarter, next year. And if you've got the right processes in place, and especially the right partnerships, you've got a much higher probability for those things to continue to happen versus, I have, maybe 1 or 2 people in my organization that are doing direct touch sales. If something happens to those folks, I have to rebuild. And not that there's a problem with that, but if I have distributed sales across many channels, whether it's partners, whether it's my business development team, whether it's my inside sales, et cetera, I have a higher probability of continuing those sales into the future. It's all about the expectations, right? It's, expectations and communication, which is, again, very similar as in our personal partnerships and relationships. But when those expectations are understood, then everybody has a much higher degree of success, and whether they want to sign up for that partnership or not. And again, that's the same in business as it is in our personal lives. And if we don't share those expectations, we were talking earlier about, having the courage to be honest in that partnership when something isn't going right. And maybe you don't even know what it is, but there's something not going right, rather than bearing that or not being willing to address that potential conflict, which I know is difficult for everybody, right? No, it's much easier to be happier than address the conflict, but you have to be able to address those things honestly. I think I use the term intellectually honest, right? You can't attack the person personally, but you have to be intellectually honest in that business partnership and that personal partnership on what's not working and why. And then also in return, be willing to listen to their perspective of that situation. Because, there's 3 perspectives, right, on any situation, yours, mine, and then somewhere there's the reality of what's actually happening. And the closer we can align to that reality, understand the expectations, that's where the magic and growth and leverage.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining me today on Selling Together. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for allowing me to spend a few minutes with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you again to Rev Genius for helping to amplify this podcast and continue the conversations. If you haven't joined yet, join the free community at revgenius.com. That's revgenius.com.